behind the scenes we get started this morning. We have a lot of ground to cover, and God willing, we will cover it. This morning's notes has a number 5 at the top of it. And the first line is Textus Receptus. If you don't have one of those, hold your hand up. Make sure you get one of those. Okay. Number 5. Say number 5 at the top.
Anybody else been asked for number 5?
Alright, also, if you did not have any notes, I know several people have come to me and said that they were missing notes from a particular week. I have them laid on the Lord's Supper table down here. They're numbered 1 through 5. So if you don't have any after class, come take a look at them and then let me know which numbers you need, and I will get those for you, because I do want everybody to have a copy of all the notes. Brother Bob, would you open us in prayer this morning, sir?
Father, this morning we're very grateful for the Word of God that we have in our life this morning. And we thank you for that. Lord, without it, I believe we'd be lost. We wouldn't know what you have in store for us. We wouldn't know how to come to thee. We wouldn't know how to walk like thee, Lord. We ask you that even this morning to open our eyes and our hearts. Lord, as Brother Philip gives us instruction on the New Testament, the one that we hold in our hand, we hold so precious. And Lord, it is the Word of God and not the Word of man. Lord, thank you for that. And Lord, I pray that you bless this morning. Bless everything we've done and for your honor, for your glory. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
As you can see, we do not have the screen this morning. So y'all have the luxury of trying to keep up with me just on paper here. So I will do my best to follow along with these notes and go to the page where y'all can write everything down. Some of y'all are laughing because you know that's not going to happen. In all fairness, though, on the second page, there's a place that says notes at the bottom. So if you need to catch up on something, you have something extra to jot down back there. On the back of the last page, you have a full page for extra notes you can write down. Right there, if you get behind, you need to come back later and put it in its place. In all honesty, too, this class that I'm teaching here, I think this is our 7th week in this. You can teach this straight on this for a year and not cover everything. But I'm trying to give enough information, enough basis, again, so you have a good understanding of our Bible and the King James Bible and where it came from. But I would encourage you to dig a little deeper on your own time. Find a reputable source of books, websites. Again, when I say reputable, I mean somewhere that's not Wikipedia or something where anybody can go on there and place their own thoughts and opinions, which is what happens all the time on the internet. I can pay $12 right now and in 10 minutes have my own website and put whatever I want to on there. And unfortunately, people will probably go to that website and read it and succumb to what I was saying on there and believe it. But again, do some research on your own. Don't rely on just what you're being taught. Learn for yourselves. I think that would be a great, great benefit to each of us. I'm going to read 2 quotes really quickly here, and we'll move along. The first one is, "No one now, I suppose, holds that the first 3 chapters of Genesis, for example, give a literal history. I could never understand how anyone reading them with open eyes could think they did." In other words, I don't know how anyone reading this could think that Genesis gives a literal history. The second quote, someone speaking said, "Which book has engaged me most is Darwin. Whatever may be thought of it is a book that one is proud to be contemporary with. My feeling is strong that the theory is unanswerable." Now, if I told you these 2 quotes came from the head of the Atheistic Society of America, you would probably be on board with that. Because I can understand that. If the leaders of the Muslim church said that, you could probably say, I can get behind that. I can see them saying that. What if I told you these 2 statements, however, were made by, for lack of a better term, the fathers of the manuscripts that are responsible for over 400 Bibles that are out there today. Men by the name of Hort and Westcott. Their text is the underlying text for over 400 Bibles that are out there today. Now next week, I won't be here. Brother Warren is going to fill in for me next week. He's going to teach on Hort and Westcott and who these men were. He's put countless hours into studying these men and what they were involved in. Of course, here you can go. These are their own statements and their own readings to tell what their thoughts were on the Bible and creation and God. But he's going to go through and he's going to look at who they were and how they so greatly came about influencing the Bibles that we have today, and show how before these two men we had two very distinct lines, manuscripts of text, and how the devil was able to use them to mesh it all into one and have make it, as I always like to say, make the waters very muddy, so to speak. So next week, again, Brother Warren will be doing that here, and I consider it a privilege to go to a church where any of our leaders, you could ask them, hey, can you teach on this? Can you teach on that? And they don't have to say, well, let me learn about it, let me go figure it out, and then maybe I can do it. But you ask them and they say, absolutely, I'm more than happy to do it, because again, they take that time to learn and to study that. And I'll be honest with you, there's not many churches you go to and ask leaders about the manuscripts or about Hort and Westcott, and any of them can answer any of the questions that you had for them. They're probably holding their Bibles in their hands and they don't know anything about them. So I consider it a huge blessing to get to go to a church where we have leadership like that, with that amount of knowledge, with that amount of devotion to the matters. But looking at your papers here, the term Textus Receptus, it translates to received by all, or the received text. Received by all, or the received text. And when I use the term Textus Receptus, you and I will be talking about the Textus Receptus that we refer to it, and we'll go through it and then you'll see what I'm saying. But there are other religions and other, groups of manuscripts or groups of documents that people have attached the term Textus Receptus to, because, as you can see, it's a generic term, means received by all. So in other religions, they decided their text is received by all also, so they're going to claim the Textus Receptus on their end as well. But again, the text received by all, or the received text. All right, so we're gonna do a little recapping to move forward here, and we look at a man by the name of Erasmus. And Erasmus published 5 editions of the Greek New Testament, or 5 versions of the Greek New Testament. The reason this is important is because his editions would become the basis for what you and I know as the Textus Receptus. So I already know his name. Well, he's kind of the one that kind of started the chain, if you will, kind of started the snowball down the hill, so to speak, towards the Textus Receptus. Then we move along to a man by the name of Robert Stephanus. Now, this was another Catholic gentleman. Like I said last week, most of these men were Catholic at the time, but he lived in France, and he was forced to leave France because the church there learned of his connections with Erasmus, and because they hated Erasmus because of the work he was doing in publishing the Greek New Testaments. Stephanus was facing persecution, so he had to flee France, and he settled in Switzerland. There in Switzerland, he published 4 editions of Erasmus' text. So he used Erasmus' text to publish his 4 editions. And let me throw this in there. When these men were publishing these editions, this wasn't like I see this as a business opportunity. I want to throw my ring in my hat in the ring to make my share of the pie kind of thing and put my edition out there. No, these were death sentences when they were doing this. So this was something where they believed wholeheartedly and strongly in the matter. And it wasn't like something where you could go necessarily, you couldn't go to the bookstore and pick up Erasmus' text and start reading. It wasn't readily available, so these men wanted to do their part in the spreading these texts. So Stephanus published 4 editions there of Erasmus' text. And he's also, he's credited with first dividing the Greek into verses and putting those divisions in there. Don't write down Greek into verses they're first translated to engage in it. See something on that. Or you can write there, but right up under it, he is the first to engage in textual criticisms. In other words, he's comparing the manuscripts that he has. And he's deriving his text from those manuscripts. Now again, he published 4 editions, and his third and fourth editions were closely aligned with Erasmus's editions, and there was hardly any disagreements, if you will, or variations between those two. Now we move on down the line to a man by the name of Theodore Beza. He printed 10, in parentheses, write 4. He printed 10, parentheses, 4 editions of the Greek New Testament. And why is it 10, but really 4? Well, because 6 of them were reprints of the same text. So he did, in fact, print 10, but 4 of them were different texts. In his third edition, he listed out 15 variant sources he used to compose his work. So this was kind of a milestone because he's listing out where his text came from and how he derived from where he was. And when he listed these out, he included that he used Stephanus' third edition. He considered a Syriac version. He considered an Arabic version. And he considered 2 manuscripts that he personally owned himself. So he had Stephanus' third edition, a Syriac version, an Arabic version, and 2 personally owned manuscripts. What's remarkable in this is that between his third edition and Stephanus' fourth edition, they differ only 38 times in the whole New Testament. I think that's pretty remarkable. You got 2 men working in 2 completely different areas here with 2 different sets of manuscripts, so to speak, 2 different sets of sources, and they come and they differ only 38 times in the making. I doubt if any of us copied the New Testament and compared them now, we're probably going to differ with each other 38 times in and of ourselves. So I'd like to think there was some divine working in there as well. Alright, so then we move along to a couple of brothers named the Elsevier brothers. And these were Dutch printers, and they took the text and they printed 2 editions of the New Testament. And these 2 brothers, they are the ones that are credited with applying the term Textus Receptus to this manuscript. Yes, sir?
What was the one for Beza's third edition and Stephanus' fourth?
They differ 38 times.
Okay. Thank you.
So they gave us the term Textus Receptus, and in the preface in their second edition, it would read, "You have therefore the text now received by all, in which we give nothing changed or corrupt." In other words, the text as we've printed here for you, we've laid it all out on the table. We've not changed anything, we've not put our ideas in there, we've thrown it out there to you. And so through this lineage, or through this line, the Textus Receptus was born. And that was a standard Greek New Testament for over 300 years. So again, the Textus Receptus is not a single text. It wasn't a manuscript that was discovered somewhere and they deemed that the Textus Receptus, but it's numerous texts that are included. You have 5 editions of Erasmus. You have 4 editions of Stephanus. You have 9 editions of Beza, that's B-E-Z-A. And then you have the 2 editions of the Elzevir brothers. Is not a single manuscript. Numerous texts. Like I told you, I'm going to try to say it, but I didn't promise I'll do everything. Yes, sir. This was in the 1600s.
You read the 5, 9, 4.
I can. It's a lot easier when I look here looking at everything in front of me, right? I can just read through it. 5 editions of Erasmus, E-R-A-S-M-U-S, Erasmus. 4 editions of Stephanus. 9 editions of Beza. 2 editions of Elzevir brothers. Everybody good there? Everybody? I saw Brother Jason at the field. You look up and see like one of them. There it is. All right. All right, so moving along, I apologize for jumping back and forth. It does relate to the Textus Receptus, so we'll move back to the path of the Bible like we started on last week, and when we're moving towards that Protestant Reformation. Brother Warren brought something to my attention last week. He said, you may want to mention to everyone that although our Bible and our text was birthed out of that Protestant Reformation, the Baptist Church was not.
Right.
The Baptist Church is, yes, we're not Protestant. We have always been, so to speak. So we were not birthed from that, but our text was birthed from that Reformation. And that is a whole different class in and of itself. Brother Fred would love to teach you all about that if you want to get with him. Calm down. I'll run in. All right. Move on to the Coverdale Bible, published by Miles Coverdale. So this was authorized by King Henry VIII of England. And King Henry VIII broke England from the Roman Catholic Church and established a Protestant church. So as these Protestant fires began burning and moving forward more so, eventually King Henry, when he took the throne, he broke them from the Roman Catholic Church. So the Roman Catholics didn't have quite the power and pull at this time over England that they had once time experienced or were hoping to maintain. So in order to signify his break with the Pope, he authorized this new translation of the Bible. This was the first English Bible to be licensed by a king, meaning it could be printed and it could be distributed out without any form of persecution. Coverdale had hoped that it would be afforded to be used in all the Anglican churches, again, all the churches there in England. But King Henry deferred that choice to the bishops in the churches who initially had opposed the Coverdale Bible to begin with. So they didn't want it, but they persuaded him to do so in a political movement, more or less, because he wanted to show his breaking from the Pope. He said, I'm going to authorize this new Bible in order to pacify the Protestants at this time. But he wouldn't go as far as to say that this Bible, has to be used in the churches. He wouldn't go that far, he would defer that to the bishop. So it was kind of like playing both sides of the field, in other words, so to speak, in order to keep peace there during his reign and his rule. Now, his Bible, the Coverdale Bible, was not widely accepted. 2 reasons. One, it was full of errors, apparently in a haste to translate it, in a haste to get it out there. There wasn't a lot of time and effort put into the work of translating it, so there were errors in it. But if you recall from last week, there was a man by the name of Tyndale who was published his New Testament. And so these are coming out kind of at the same time. Tyndale was a little ahead of him here. But because Tyndale New Testament was enjoying such success, it was hard for the Coverdale Bible to gain much traction there. People were leaning towards Tyndale's Bible. So this was authorized by King Henry VIII, and it was not widely accepted because of its errors and because of Tyndale's newly published Bible. Now, following the Coverdale Bible, we have what's referred to as Matthew's Bible, or the Matthew's Bible. It was not published by anyone named Matthews, but it was published by a man named John Rogers. And why did John Rogers publish the Matthew's Bible? Because he was afraid of persecution. So he put it under another name to keep himself specifically out of the Bible, so to speak. And he wouldn't have to face any persecution from the government for publishing this Bible. He published this one in 1537. It contained over 2,000 marginal notes in the Bible, in the Matthew Bible. Over 2,000 notes, which caused his downfall. It's hard to read a Bible if you have 2,000 notes along the sides and the margins while you're trying to read that Bible. You're trying to read, jump back and forth to the notes and everything. It's probably hard to keep up with where you're going in your Bible. So, because of that, it did not gain much acceptance in the way of Bibles. So, following Coverdale's Bible and Matthew's Bible, there was no official Bible for the Church of England. So King Henry was pressed upon, and he authorized another translation of the Bible, and this time he again chose Miles Coverdale as the editor. I don't know why he chose Miles Coverdale again. The guy made numerous errors. His Bible didn't get anywhere the first go around, so I don't know if that was another ploy just to pacify the people, and he thought, well, he'll do the same again, and I don't have to worry about it getting accepted, gaining ground, whatever it may be. I don't know, but for whatever reason, he chose Miles Coverdale again as the next editor of the Bible. And so, after he chose Miles Coverdale, he produced the Great Bible. Anybody want to take a stab at why it was called the Great Bible? Because it was big. It was like this one over here. It wasn't quite that big. It was 16 and a half inches by 11 inches. So it was called the Great Bible due to its size. And it was so big that it couldn't be printed in England. They had to ship it to France to print it because they didn't have a printer capable, or a printing press capable of printing anything that size at the time in England. Well, they shipped it to France. Well, they got wind of it in France and wanted to put a stop to it because they weren't going to be publishing and shipping Bibles out there in France. Well, through a series of events, it got labeled more or less as trash and trash paper. So they loaded it on the ship back to England as trash, when in actuality it was a Bible. So it got shipped back to England. And it was the first English Bible to place the books in their current order and to be authorized for public use and placed in every church in England. This is often referred to as the chained Bible. It's called the chained Bible because when they authorized it in order to be placed in every church, they had to chain it to the pew or else it would get stolen. That's how bad the people wanted the word. So they had to chain it, so it was referred to as the chained Bible. So now you have the Bible is authorized to be used in the churches, is being put into the common man's hands instead of just the bishops and the high-ups in the church. And for whatever reason, in his latter years, where King Henry kind of loosened up on the Protestants and the Bible, he kind of crawfished on them, so to speak, and did a 180. And he once again, he imposed restrictions on the Bible usage. And he took it out of the churches, and he took it out of the common man's hands, and he put it back into the upper class's hands. And at this time, he also made a proclamation that all other Bibles, other than the Great Bible, were forbidden. In the Tyndale, the Coverdale, Matthew Bible, they were all confiscated when found and destroyed. So he kind of loosened his grip, authorized the Bible, and said, yeah, put it in the church, put it in every man's hands. And then later on, he decided, nope, take it back. We're going to put it back in the upperclassmen's hands, and no other Bibles are authorized to be used with that one. All the other ones are to be destroyed. So following King Henry's reign, you have a man by the name of King Edward VI that came along, and he succeeded Henry in the throne, and he completely reversed those restrictions. So he reversed all the restrictions that King Henry had placed there. And so now new editions of all those previous versions were again being printed. The Great Bible was once again returned to man and put back in all the churches. And so again, the common man had access to the language in his own scripture, access to the scriptures in his own language. Again, at this point, thanks to King Edward VI. So it was a good time as far as Bibles and the man reading the Bible for himself in England during his reign. All right, now we move along again to Queen Mary, who was deemed the less than flattering title she might have enjoyed being known as Bloody Mary. It wasn't because she enjoyed the drinks, it was because she caused a lot of bloodshed. When King Edward died, there were two people that were in line to take the throne. There was Mary, and there was her cousin, Lady Jane Grey. Now, Mary was the daughter of King Henry VIII. And if you know about King Henry VIII, he would try over and over again to have a son, and he had his wives beheaded and all that stuff, and they wouldn't give him sons. So she was the daughter, one of the daughters of King Henry VIII. And because he was married to Catherine at the time, and he wanted to divorce Catherine after the birth of Mary because she didn't give him a son, the Catholic Church wouldn't grant them a divorce, but they annulled the marriage. So what happened is when the marriage was annulled, Mary is now deemed an illegitimate child, if you will, and so she was not rightly in line as heir to the throne or heiress to the throne at this time, because her father had his marriage to her mother annulled. Now, Mary was fiercely loyal to the Roman Catholic Church. And the reason so is she blamed her dad in that he wasn't following the church, and when they said they won't give you a divorce, that he didn't just stay married to her mother so she could rightly take the throne. So she was bitter at that, and again, she was very loyal to the Roman Catholic Church, and she hated Protestants at the same time. Now, at the time, again, her and Lady Jane Grey are the only two that have any claim to power, so to speak, but Mary had public support on her side at this time. So Mary took the throne in England. Her first order of business was executing her cousin, Lady Jane Grey, so there would be no power struggle. And because of her, again, her torture and her persecution of the Protestants, she was known as Bloody Mary. So she forced these men to flee to Switzerland. The Protestants left and would flee to Switzerland. It was like a safe haven for them at this time. So it's here in Switzerland that all these men just happened to end up together. These men that had published the Bible just happened to end up together in the same place. And so you have Miles Coverdale, you have Theodore Beza, a man by the name of John Knox, and others. And they got together and created a new Bible. And that Bible was referred to as the Geneva Bible. You'll probably have heard of the Geneva Bible. Now, after this happened, Queen Mary and her bishops they created what was called the Bishop's Bible to try to combat this. It did not gain much traction other than the churches at that time, or one of the common names they had no use for it. But the Geneva Bible, as you see in your notes there, was the first English version to use those verse divisions. It was the first to remove the Apocrypha. If you don't know what the Apocrypha is, get with Brother Charles, Brother Freddie, they'll be happy to explain that to you. It was the first Bible to use the Roman font that you enjoy in most of your King James Bibles now. And it was freely printed and distributed in England after Elizabeth I took the throne following Mary's death. And 68 editions of the Geneva Bible were printed. All right. So moving ahead. So Queen Elizabeth is King of England. This is in 1558. This is not in your notes. I'm giving you this to give you a backstory. Now, when she comes and takes the throne, she is a strong Protestant. And so during her reign, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth there, officially the hold of Roman Catholicism was broken there in England. They pretty much lost all grip at this time. Now, her life was threatened numerous times by the Roman Catholic leaders there. The Pope had offered at the time to finance wars against England. They would go to various countries. Hey, I'll give you what you want if you'll go to war against and remove her from the throne. Because of the pull that now they were starting to have in England. And of course that didn't happen. But at the same time, when Queen Elizabeth was ruling in England, she had a cousin by the name of Mary Stuart. And she was Queen of Scotland. Now, Mary Stuart was a staunch Catholic. Scotland wasn't the place to be at the time if you were a staunch Catholic, because Protestantism was hotter, or just as hot there in Scotland as it was in England. So because of her Catholic ties and her strong Catholic beliefs, she was forced to abandon her throne. And she fled Scotland, and in sort of a poor decision, I guess you would say, she fled to England. And she thought, well, I'll be safer in England. Well, at the time, if you were a Catholic and you went to England, you're not going to be much safer than you are in Scotland at the time, because again, the Protestant fires we thought are burning hot there in England. But perhaps she thought, I'll go be with my cousin and I'll be some refuge and I'll find safety there in England. However, some 20 years after she arrived in England, she was beheaded for plotting to overthrow Queen Elizabeth. So that didn't work out real well for her. So she left Scotland in hopes of finding refuge in England. Eventually she's beheaded and falls off the scenes. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because when Queen Mary left her throne in Scotland, she left behind a 10-month-old baby boy by the name of James.
Amen.
And James, at this time, his mother left. James is claimed to power. He's the king at this point. So, of course, we're not going to consider a 10-month-old baby as king. But when he turned 18, he took over and he was the king of Scotland. Well, it just so happens, 20 years after that, his second cousin, Elizabeth I, Queen of England, died. And King James of Scotland is in line to be the King of England. So King James begins to make his trek from Scotland to England to take the throne. So it was in 1603, if you're interested, King James VI left London to become King James I of England. Now, at this time, however, in England, the bubonic plague is running rampant. So because of such, he has to wait outside the cities for some time for the plague to subside before he goes in. because obviously he doesn't want to catch the plague himself. So he's waiting outside of London for the disease to go away. And while he's waiting out there, you have these men and these petitions that are brought before the king. And what you have is, you have the Puritans and you have Episcopalians. And both of these were birthed out of the Protestant Reformation. But you have two groups that are already divided amongst themselves. You have the Puritans, who wanted any kind of ties to Catholicism, anything that looked, smelled, act like Catholicism, they wanted it removed from the churches. They wanted to be completely free of any of that. You had the Episcopalians, however, who were somewhat still loyal to the traditions of Roman Catholicism and didn't want to be opposed to their power and opposed to the kingdom, if you will. So while they were in fact Protestants at the time, and they didn't want the same strongholds of Roman Catholicism, they didn't want to completely break from Roman Catholicism. Whereas the Puritans were like, well, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So we want to break all ties completely that have anything to do with Roman Catholicism. So these petitions, while King James is waiting outside of London, are brought to him. And the petitions, if you're curious, they're called the millenary petitions that the Puritan preachers brought to him during this time. Changes that they wanted to be made during his reign, in other words. Now, at the time, because he knew that Protestantism had been gaining ground and continuously gaining ground, both when he was originally from Scotland and in England, he didn't want to be caught up in the middle, if you will, between a war or between a division and that was going to break out between the Episcopalians and the Puritans. And this was called division amongst his kingdom, and he didn't want that to happen, obviously. And he couldn't just dismiss them like, he might have wanted to do and just, go about your business, go about your way, because he knew the Puritan following had gotten too large to simply ignore them at this time. So he decides to bring them together to have a conference. He wants to bring them together and have a meeting, if you will, to settle the differences and to make peace between the two. And one thing I was reading, it actually said that King James used the word loathed the Puritans. He didn't have any use for them. He didn't like them, didn't want anything to do with them, really, or their beliefs. Why? Because the Episcopalians still had loyalty to the crown. They still maintained submission to whoever was on the throne and had power. And as king, he liked that, and that they were going to be submissive to him, even through their new, religion, if you will. But again, because of the Puritan following had grown so large, he agreed to hold this conference. So on January 14th of 1604, you have the Hampton Court Conference. Hampton Court Conference. And this was a 3-day conference. You had the Episcopalians and the Puritans. They come to air their grievances, so to speak. And just to show the Puritans that it wasn't going to go real well for them, King James didn't even let them come to the first 2 days of the conference. So it was, you're going to get to come air your grievances before me. I'll hear both sides of it. But you guys on this side, you don't even get to come for the first 2 days. I'll hear some of what you guys said the last day. Not only that, the men that brought these grievances, that were the heads that wanted to come to this conference and represent their cause, he didn't even allow them to come. He said, you can send representatives for you to come. Wouldn't even allow these men to come. So at the conference, there was some 50 Episcopalians, and you had 4 Puritans. And the 4 Puritans were just representatives, so they didn't have the same strong convictions or knowledge of the matters that the original men that brought the grievances were going to bring to the king. You say you make the King James sound bad. No, I'm telling you the history of it. It doesn't change your Bible. So the Puritans were denied any opportunity to present any argument until the last day. So finally they get there the last day and they get to make their request known. And they go through a list of grievances, And the man by the name of John Reynolds, he's bringing these businesses ahead of or to King James, and he asked that they put preachers in the churches to preach weekly sermons. King James said no. He said, we want to do away with when they get married, a man and a groom and a bride say their wedding vows, and the bride says to the groom at this time, he said, with my body, to thee will I worship and adore thee. To the groom, they said, we want to get rid of that. King James laughed at him and said, no, not with that. So on the serious matters, they were completely denied. On the most trivial matters, they were completely denied. So John Reynolds makes one final request to him, and if you go read the history books, they don't know why he made this last request to him. It wasn't on the initial list that they had given him to make before the king. But for whatever reason, John Reynolds goes to King James and he says, I want to make a new Bible. Let's make a new translation, so to speak. And he, if I can get the full up, I'll read it to you. He goes before the king and he says, we want to make a new Bible. We want it to be a Bible that is free of any marginal notes, free of any opinions, one that's true to the original languages. We want to make it the official Bible of England. And what he did is he quoted that there had been mistranslations in the Geneva Bible and in the Bishop's Bible. He said, what we basically want to do is fix those errors and make a new official Bible for England. Well, these two errors, they didn't exist in the Geneva Bible. And King James would have known that, because the Geneva Bible he would have been very familiar with in Scotland. But for whatever reason, he agreed to do it. He agreed to make it happen. And so when he requested his new Bible, or when John Reynolds requested his new Bible to be made, King James agreed. Finishing up really quickly here. The main reason that they think he agreed with this is because in the Geneva Bible, their translation is where the Egyptian midwives in Exodus disobeyed the king in not destroying the children of the Hebrew women. There was a note in that Bible relating to that text that said their disobedience to the king was lawful. And King James didn't like that note was in there that said their disobedience to the king was lawful, because he thought they could read this Bible and they have justification to go against what I say. So you'll hear people say, well, King James authorized the translation of that Bible for political reasons. They're absolutely correct. 100% correct. God didn't have to send an angel from heaven to talk to King James and inspire him to give the world the King James Bible. God can use circumstances in advance the way he wants to use it. So while King James thinks he's making a step in the right direction for his kingdom, God is just preserving his words down through the ages for you and I. So 54 men were selected. 47 of them actually performed work to translate the Bible. They were divided into 6 companies. You had 2 at Westminster, 2 at Cambridge, and 2 were at Oxford. I'm out of time. But quickly, I'll tell you, the way they were, and we'll go through it more after next week, but the way that they decided to translate these books, each company was assigned a portion of the books to translate. And so these men that were in each company, whatever books it was deemed for you to translate, you yourself had to individually translate that book of the Bible. So if your company was assigned Genesis, and you're 12 men, all 12 of you would translate Genesis. When you got done, all 12 of you would sit down and compare your translations of Genesis with the manuscript that you had available, the Textus Receptus of the New Testament and the Ben Shaim text of the Old Testament that we learned about. And you would discuss that in disagreements. You would look back at the originals, and then you would decide how to make one sole copy for your company of the book of Genesis. Then, after y'all 12 came to an agreement on that one book of Genesis, you would take that book of completed Genesis and you would send it, if you were at Cambridge, you would send it to Westminster and you would send it to Oxford. Here's what we've got with for Genesis. Those 12 men, here and here, 24, would sit down and they would look at your translation, your company's translation of Genesis. They had the same manuscripts, same text. If they found errors or they found disagreements in the text, they would make a note of those in the copies that you sent to them. They would then, in turn, take that copy and send it back to you with their recommended changes. Your 12 would sit back down, look at the recommended changes, and decide, based on the manuscripts, do we make these changes? Did we mess up? What do we do? And you would form a finalized copy of Genesis. You would then take that finalized copy that came back to those other two that you made another set of changes, or not two, and you would send that to a group of 12 men. And then these were not at the other two schools. This was an additional committee of 12 men. You would send that finalized book to them. They would then in turn scrutinize it just as much as you and the other two groups did. These 12 men would look at your copy of Genesis, make any changes they felt like needed to be made, or any errors, omissions, anything like that. Then they would send it off to two other men that were selected to finalize that book. These other two men would read over it, finalize it, and they would send it off to the printer at this point. So the book would be revised, edited, checked some 15 times. Not by 15 people, way more than 15 people. But it was checked, each book was checked some 15 times before it was ever agreed upon and finalized to be sent off to the printer. So that's why 7 years, it took some 7 years to get what we have now known as the King James Bible. Again, I'm out of time. I've gone over a few minutes. I apologize. But I'll go through a little bit more to look at the rules that the translators had to abide by and that were set forth for them. I have a church Bible. It's a church publisher's Bible. I don't know, I'm sure it's not the only one that does it, but it has in the beginning a letter from the translators to the readers that they actually put together when they translate this Bible. If you have one in the front of your Bible, you ever take the time to read it. It's pretty amazing what they put in there as well. But I hope, again, that you'll be here next week with Brother Warren, and he's going to go through Port and Westcott and these men and how they corrupted the Bibles that we have today. All right? So I'll see y'all next time. Thank y'all.